Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. I am back from Jordan. I am going to be scheduling a live stream to tell you all about the trip. I'm going to be bringing a couple of my friends on for that live stream who were with me in Jordan, so we can just rave about what an amazing country, amazing people, amazing scenery, amazing history that they have there. But that's for another day. Today, we're diving into some more chat history. This one is the most one-sided wars in history. The link is down in the description to the original, and I will pin in the comment section a playlist with all of my reactions that I've done to chat history over time. As of now, chat history is just about 34,000 subscribers away, 44,000 subscribers, my math is not what it used to be, away from 1 million. So if you like what you see, definitely get over there and subscribe to them. Let's get them a little bit closer. Let's dive in.
History's most one-sided wars.
Not familiar with this.
There's that quote about all being fair in love and war, but I don't think that someone swinging their sword at an Ordnance BL 5-inch howitzer artillery cannon would find it very fair. And that's pretty much what happened during the Battle of Omdurman. Now, if you're familiar with African history around the turn of the 20th century, you know that it was nothing short of a shit show. European powers were grabbing anything and everything they could get their hands on to see what natural resources could be tapped into.
Yeah, so a lot of the reason I think why you see European powers going after Africa especially in the mid to late 18th and into the 19th into the 20th centuries is because they've been cut off from doing the same in the Americas. After you have all the revolutions, Haiti, United States, all the South American and Central American places, they're looking elsewhere. They're looking to the South Pacific. They're looking to Africa because they're able to exploit those people, and they're able to do that because there's no United Nations, there's no world organization that's really looking to stop them. Everybody else is just looking and saying, well, they're doing it, I better do it too.
As for the British, one of their more tactical moves was seizing control of the Egyptian territory from the Ottoman Empire in the late 1880s. Why Egypt? Well, because Egypt has the Suez Canal, basically a super sweet shortcut connecting the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, and thus the Indian Ocean. So
we talk all the time about lenses through which to view history, and trade and resources are a huge lens through which to view history. You know, think about how 1453 Constantinople falls to the Ottoman Empire. That is a process through which trade gets cut off for Europe over land to the east. What does that cause them to do? Start looking west for ways to access that without having to go through the Ottoman Empire or go around Africa. And so this is part of that, right? This is access through water without having to go all the way around. And the Ottoman Empire by the late 19th century is progressively weakening, so it's the right time to do it.
Guess who owned India at the time? Also the British. So instead of slogging the freshly plundered raw materials all the way around the scenic circumference of Africa, merchants could just speedrun that shit through the Suez, potentially saving months of sailing. Now, with the seizure of Egypt came a bit of a bonus, some territory to the south, known as Sudan, but it came with some baggage of its own. If Egypt were to be the crisp, clean shirt in the deal, Sudan was going to be the pants. And these pants were about to be shat.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is the problem, right? If you're after resources, if you're doing this because you want what the land can produce for you or what it offers, like the Suez Canal, you don't want to have to deal with a bunch of extra land and a bunch of very angry native population in those places that might not be happy about your rule of their territory.
So while the British now controlled Sudan on paper, it wasn't really the case in reality, at least not yet. Throwing even more chaos into the mix were the not-so-modest Mahdists, an independent Islamic group that rose up and rebelled against their Ottoman Egyptian oppressors, establishing their own state in the Sudanese territory back when the Ottomans controlled the region just a decade earlier. They didn't give a flying flip that the British were now the technical rulers of the land. Oppressors were oppressors.
Right. Now, I'm guessing they're probably not seeing a difference, right? It's the Ottomans. Now they've been replaced by the British. We defeated the Ottomans. We can handle the British, too. Completely different animal, though.
As a matter of fact, they were feeling a bit big in the britches after just toppling the Ottoman control, so they were eager to start round two. The British, though, initially wanted to abandon Sudan, declaring it too much of a political and financial burden to deal with, what with all the squabbling and whatnot.
Yeah, if you're spread out all over the world as the British Empire is by this point, where they're approaching controlling 1/4 of the land in the world, you have to pick and choose where you want to send your forces, your navy, your army. This is not a really easily accessible area for the navy, except by the Nile River. You really don't want to be overstretched.
They would instead leave the Mahdists to have their own land and not intervene. However, continued Mahdist aggression led to the death of one Charles Gordon, a renowned British general who was tasked with evacuating civilians from the Sudanese spit-sounding capital city of Khartoum.
Mahdist soldiers slaughtered around 10,000
Wow.
innocent civilians in the wake of Charles's assassination.
Here's one of those examples of you just don't know when to quit, right? You've got your freedom. The British are leaving you alone for the most part. Just live and let live. But instead, you had to be super aggressive, and now you're going to pay the price.
The act switched British opinion from indifference to vowing vengeance. Thus, in 1896, the British began the Anglo-Egyptian conquest of Sudan. This war lasted about 3 years, with British forces steamrolling the Mahdists in virtually every encounter. Well, if it's so one-sided, why did it take 3 years? Good question. This was actually by design. You see, the British were slowly advancing into Sudan, building a supply railroad behind them the whole way so as to not have supplies run dry and be caught with their pants down, an issue that had previously plagued the British in the past.
This is one of the struggles when you're getting into the age of industrial warfare, where you have significant size artillery pieces, howitzers, things like that. You've got machine guns. You've got all the food and supplies that are needed for weaponry. You need a substantial way to move that. So this is actually pretty smart by the British.
The conquest culminated in the Battle of Omdurman on September 2nd, 1898. Oof, just lasting a single day, huh? Talk about foreboding. Yeah, so this battle wasn't so much of a battle as it was a full-blown massacre. Here's where the one-sidedness kicks in. About 26,000 British and Egyptian troops faced off against over 50,000 Sudanese warriors. Seems like a slam dunk for Sudan, but...
No, but how many times in history have we seen this? I mean, we see Julius Caesar. Granted, he probably fudged the numbers some when he's fighting against Vercingetorix and the Gauls. Significantly outnumbered, greater than this. You know, we've seen what happened at Rorke's Drift, where the British have a couple hundred guys going up against thousands of Zulu warriors. When you have machine guns and artillery, that's a big leveler on the playing field.
Your size is no match for optimal equipment. Remember that supply railway I just mentioned? Well, it supplied the British front lines with 17,000 rolling block rifles, 8,000 bolt-action rifles, 44 artillery cannons, and 40 state-of-the-art water-cooled Maxim automatic machine guns.
Jeez.
Oh yeah, there was also a handful of naval gunboats ready to tear shit up from the banks of the Nile. The Mahdists, well, they tried. They had several thousand firearms.
Is that a Nerf gun laying there?
From previous battles, as well as a few dozen artillery, but they were either poorly maintained or those operating them were poorly trained. The unlucky fellas not equipped with firearms instead brandished the old reliable sword and shield. And it went just about as well as you'd think. The Mahdists were completely and utterly destroyed.
I mean, this is like, there's Winston Churchill with a very interesting mustache. This reminds me a lot of Shiroyama, where you had that last stand by the samurai against tens of thousands of conscripts with modern weapons in Japan. It just never ends well.
According to 23-year-old British Lieutenant Winston Churchill, yes, that Winston Churchill,
Lieutenant,
approximately 11,000 Mahdist soldiers lay dead, 16,000 wounded, and over 4,000 captured. The rest either surrendered or just fled. As for the British, less than 50 soldiers were killed in battle, a testament to the sheer imbalance of weapons technology and tactical warfare.
My goodness.
After the battle, the Mahdist state was effectively dismantled, cementing British dominance in Sudan.
Kettle War. I don't think I know this one either.
Wars can be won without inflicting any real damage. You just have to be well versed in the art of intimidation. Even if you're a tiny pushover, you can still get your way if you make yourself seem scary enough.
This is nature, right? I mean, there are animals that have evolved to the place where they are able to seem bigger, stronger, scarier to scare off predators. But that only works if they're actually scared. And if they call your bluff, you're in trouble.
The Kettle War is a prime example of this tactic. At the end of the 80 Years' War back in 1648, the Dutch gained independence from the Spanish. In addition to establishing their own little republic within the Netherlands, the Dutch had full access to a gaping mouth, the mouth of the Scheldt River. This was a critical trade route for many cities just south of the newly formed republic.
So a question for any of our Dutch viewers. I know I've got a couple friends, I could probably just ask them, but I did a podcast recently on Stories of the Great War where I was talking about the 37th Division from Ohio. And they were actually involved in an operation at this river. And in researching, I was under the understanding that it was pronounced the Scheldt River, but I could be completely wrong about that. So anybody who lives there, please tell me.
Cities that were still under smelly Spanish control. So the Dutch took advantage of the situation. Oh yeah, time to close the river.
Sounded more like Norwegian than Dutch.
All trade access through the Scheldt, completely crippling the economies of the downstream cities. Instead, trade was diverted through the Dutch ports of Amsterdam and Rotterdam, allowing them to flourish into dominant trade hubs. The funny thing though, nothing would be done about it for 136 years. But in the late 1700s, there was a new sheriff in town for the Holy Roman Empire, Joseph II, and he did not.
And Joseph II is, the Holy Roman Emperors at this point are Habsburgs, and it was the Habsburgs, the Spanish Habsburgs, that controlled the Netherlands. It was Spanish Netherlands. And so I'm sure there's a part of him that's like, I'd like to get that back for my family if I can.
Not like the Dutch doing what they were doing. As a rather ambitious reformer, he was aiming to make his empire the main political and economic power in Europe, but the whole closure of the Scheldt thing was a big old turd in the punch bowl of his plans, so he needed to act, and act he did. Having just gotten their strength kicked in by the British during the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War in 1784, Joseph II decided to take advantage of a now weakened Dutch republic. The demand was simple: open up the river or go to war. Now, when your territory—
give me river, give you death—
is like this, and another territory threatening you looks like this, it might be best to just let them have this one. In reality, however, the Holy Roman Empire's army was fairly scattered across the mainland, being—
yeah, and we see that, but and you also have the fact that the Holy Roman Empire is this massive entity that's made up of all kinds of tiny entities, some bigger than others, that don't always get along and like each other and have different religions. You've got, Protestant and Catholic, and you've even probably got some Muslims there in the southeast, and you've got different languages and different cultures, and it's not like one big army that's all with the same mindset and the same goals and the same desires, and you've got to care for a lot of territory. And we see that in the Napoleonic Wars not long after this, how the Holy Roman Empire just really can't put up a fight.
Particularly small and ill-equipped near the Netherlands, so the immediate threat was minimal at best. As a show of force though, and to keep up the illusion of strength, Joseph sent out a small squadron of 3 naval warships, led by the heavily armed, no-nonsense having flagship Le Louis. The ships were sent to the mouth of the Scheldt to sit there and look intimidating. The Dutch, however, called the empire out on their bluff. On October—
That's what I was saying earlier, right? If you call the bluff, then you better be able to back up your threat.
9th, 1784, they intercepted the 3 opposing warships with one of their own, the Dolphin, and it was looking to blow some holes into other ships. In an act of intimidation of their own, the Dolphin fired a single warning shot towards Le Louis. A soup in the morning, a soup at night, a soup—
This is where the kettle comes from?
Feel right. Oh man, now I'm super depressed. The warning shot from the Dolphin whizzed through the galley of Le Louis, causing the casualty of a single soup kettle. Hilariously, the crew of Le Louis surrendered immediately, chalking up a victory for the Dutch Republic with a single cannon shot.
I have questions here. Like, there must have been some standing order that they were there to look intimidating, but they weren't actually there to fire and start a war, because that might bring in other powers like the British into things. I can't believe they just would have surrendered otherwise.
Joseph II, not to be embarrassed, declared full-on war, but no violence ever came of it. Instead, both agreed to negotiate. The result? The Scheldt remained closed, but the Dutch would compensate the Holy Roman Empire a hefty sum for the inconvenience. Around 2 to 10 million Dutch guilder, or roughly $120 to $600 million million in today's money.
Yeah, but the one thing the Dutch have at this time is money, right? You got the Dutch East Indies Company, which is this massive corporation, really like the first stock corporation in history. And they had just loaned a bunch of money to the United States to help us get off our feet during the Revolution and afterward. So I guess they could probably handle that, right?
I'd say that compensates for the soup. My soup.
China.
War and drugs is a pretty solid combination, but when said substances are used in warfare, it becomes a whole other matter entirely. Let's touch back on the early 1800s. Despite being halfway around the world, the British Empire still commanded trade in the Indian Ocean, even stretching into the Pacific, with one of their main suppliers being Imperial China. The Qing dynasty was doling out all kinds of goods to the Brits, including earthy herbs, soft silks, precious porcelain, and the iconic British life fuel, tea. While this trade was good for the British consumer, the rather one-sided trade imbalance left British merchants a tad miffed. The British Empire was absolutely hemorrhaging silver to pay for all of the goods with no reciprocity. The Chinese simply had little to no interest in British goods like wool or cotton. And that was a problem as British silver reserves.
Yeah, wool for a long time is like the British main export. That's why you see so much of British history focused on sheep. And you have the Highland clearances in Scotland where they realize it's much more profitable to have sheep on the land than it is to have humans on the land. But yeah, if you can't get them to take your exports, but you're importing a ton of stuff from them, that's got to change. And China has a lot of people, but they probably don't have much of a navy. So how's the British going to handle this?
Reserves were drying up, putting a damper on the liquidity of trade in the region. So what do you do if there's no demand? You force it. The British began secretly exporting Indian-grown opium into Chinese ports.
Geez.
Smugglers paid for the opium with silver, which then paid for more Chinese goods, completing a more sustainable trade loop.
So, what's your trade look like? Well, we import all kinds of great stuff like tea and spices from China, and we give them drugs that they're addicted to and can't stop buying. Wow.
British merchants were happy, Chinese smugglers were happy, the majority of the Chinese population were suffering crippling addiction. You know how it goes. So yeah, it's no surprise that opium demand soon turned exponential. From 1797 to 1833, opium imports soared from 680,000 pounds a year to over 5.1 million pounds a year.
And it's probably no coincidence then that during this same time, the British are funding the Napoleonic Wars, right? I mean, so much of the reason why Napoleon had to keep fighting these wars against coalitions is because the British were bankrolling it. They weren't sending troops, at least not until the later coalitions, but they were sending a lot of money, and they were getting that money from places like this and places like India.
I mean, it was a silver gold mine. Even American merchants got in on the action, selling Turkish opium to China. But this started to tip the scales too far in the other direction, now with the Chinese silver reserves reaching unsustainable levels, not to mention the effects on the general population. Before, the average British consumer was just sipping their Chinese tea from ornate porcelain cups while relaxing in their comfy silk robes. Now, the average Chinese consumer was struggling to detach themselves from their pipe. Although the Chinese emperor had outright banned opium usage, it didn't stop the average fella from getting their fix.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Millions upon millions were addicted, leading to a drastic decline in productive laborers, merchants, farmers, and teachers. Well,
right, and which means they're not able to produce the products that the British want to import, so it's ending up a net negative for them.
In 1839, the Chinese emperor put his silky slippered foot down. Severe punishments were put in place for anyone dabbling in deals of opium. All imports of the stuff were seized and destroyed. Famously, the kickstart of the Opium War was the seizure and destruction of over 2.9 million pounds of opium in one go. The British were not pleased with getting shafted out of payment for the product, so they demanded reparations.
Give us reparations for the illicit drugs that you destroyed that we were trying to dump on your people.
At cannon point. Just a year later in 1840, a British naval fleet positioned itself off of China's eastern coast and began bringing the heat, bullying various islands into submission as to establish a base of operations. Let's take a look at the roster for both sides. The British in this campaign commanded over 19,000 soldiers and 37 ships. Standing in China's corner, though, was an estimated 100,000 mobilized infantry. China had the numbers, but Britain had the technology. Chinese fortresses? Demolished. Resistance groups? Destroyed. Innocent civilian generational homesteads? Deleted. Campaigning up the Pearl River, the British blasted their way to the Chinese commercial heart of Canton, still hell-bent on getting their compensation. Sir, the British are here. Both parties sat down at a pretty cool-looking table and agreed to peace terms. But the overarching powers in charge, mainly the Qing Emperor and the British Foreign Secretary, refused said terms, prompting the supersaturated British to withdraw from the Pearl and shoot up the Yangtze River to clog any and all economic arteries. This forced China to renegotiate the peace conditions, resulting in the drafting of the Treaty of Nanjing in 1842. As a result, opium usage remained illegal, but new trade ports would be open to British imports, which, hilariously enough, was still royal shit tons of opium. The island of Hong Kong was ceded to the British as a colony, and
Hong Kong remained British until, our lifetimes. For many of us, I remember when the handover happened. It was in the late 90s.
China was forced to pay nearly 26 million silver dollars in reparations to the British. This comes out to roughly $830 million in purchasing power, or roughly $1.3 billion in silver value alone. Now, there was a second opium war a few decades later, but just like a bunch of farmers winning 2 donkey auctions, the Chinese got their asses handed to them a second time.
Oh, I don't know this one.
This one's a classic.
Did the British just go to war with everybody? Yeah, I know they did, but I'm...
Now, I briefly ran through this one in my History Facts You Wouldn't Believe Are True video, but let's revisit it with a deeper understanding and some better artwork. The Anglo-Zanzibar War holds the record as the shortest war in known human history, lasting just 38 minutes. I mean, your commute home is probably longer than that. You're listening to D101 The Shaft. All other radio stations can suck a dick.
Actually, so one of the guys that I was just in Jordan with, we called him Indy, his name's Patrick, is in Zanzibar right now on another tour. Where Freddie Mercury's from.
The reasoning behind the war was very simple. By the end of the 1800s, Zanzibar was a major trade hub off the eastern coast of Africa. Whoever controlled it had massive influence in the region's exchange of goods, including spices, ivory, and the frequent slave or two.
Isn't it interesting? Once again, trade, spices, resources.
Putting all profits that go with it. With European powers scrambling for Africa, Britain needed to cement its ability to control trade, hence the discussion about it taking Egypt in the first chapter. But Zanzibar was also unethically up for grabs. A treaty was signed in 1890, and the nation of Zanzibar, while remaining independent, became a British protectorate, meaning that
we'll protect you.
The British technically held power over Zanzibar, but it could self-govern with guaranteed British protection should things go awry.
Things went awry.
On August 25th, 1896, the British Empire's favorite sultan, along with his esteemed beard, received a sudden and premature ticket to paradise. Some believe he may or may not have been poisoned, but no proof has ever surfaced to support that claim. What's suspicious, though, is that the sultan's less impressive facial hair-having cousin, Khalid bin Bargash, decided to claim the throne for himself while the previous sultan's body was still warm. Oh, and fun fact, this same guy lost out on the throne just 3 years prior. Highly suspicious, one might say, fingering their mustache. Unfortunately for Khalid, only a British-approved sultan could sit on the throne. Unfortunately for the British, he didn't give a fuck. In case you didn't know, the name Khalid in Arabic means immortal or everlasting, a name that was about to be put to the test using multiple British gunboats just strapped to the tits with cannons and machine guns.
Our bus driver in Jordan, his name was was it Abu Khalid? Yeah.
On August 26th, the very next day after the Sultan had just died, Khalid was given an ultimatum: surrender by 9 a.m. the next morning, or be converted into a fine red mist. Khalid refused, not believing that the British had the balls to actually do anything about it.
Don't underestimate the
He
British.
assembled a small army of his own, including a few outdated cannons and guns, but the comparison of firepower was laughable. Multiple warnings were given to the usurper the next morning, up until an hour before the deadline. However, the warnings fell on deaf ears.
So it makes me wonder, like, did he really think he could win, or did he just not care? And he figured he'd become a hero, he figured he'd become a martyr doing this, I don't know.
The clock struck the hour, 9 a.m. The air was still with a deafening silence so quiet, you could hear a subscribe button click. The order was given. The gunboats unleashed their volleys on the Sultan's palace for 38 minutes. Suffice to say, it was completely destroyed.
Jeez.
After the guns
that's about as direct as it can get, right? Where you're able to just go right at the palace directly, because the war's not against the people, it's against this individual. So it probably helps with your hearts and minds cause as well.
silent, over 500 men and women, mostly innocent civilians, lay dead.
Maybe not.
The British suffered
Yeah, I
only
guess your fire's not as accurate as you'd like it to be in 1896.
one injury, a simple splinter from flying debris. As for Khalid, he snuck off into hiding but was eventually captured
Didn't even get
and
him.
exiled. That afternoon, the British placed a new approved sultan in place, and within a few weeks, a new palace was built. A happy ending for most. This episode of Chat History is called Emu Wool. Listen, I know the subject has been beaten to death worse than a wife at an alcoholics convention, but now it's my turn. Back in 1932, the inverted hellhole that is Australia had one heck of a problem. After the Great War, returning veterans needed something to help them cope with the fact that they just lived through the most traumatic event of their lives.
Yeah, and listen, Australia went through it worse than most. If you look at the percentages that were lost in terms of the men who served, and then the percentage of them that ended up either killed or wounded, pretty substantial. I'm not sure there are too many countries, at least not in the Allied cause, that suffered as badly as Australia did.
So far. In order to supply such a remedy, the Australian government encouraged returning veterans to settle on remote farmland out west. This relaxing, freeing, open-air experience hypothetically would do the mind and body good for the recovering war heroes. But with a lack of farming experience and putting said low-level farmers in less than ideal agricultural conditions, it became way more of a burden than a life of leisure. Oh yeah, and that Great Depression thing was going on. What, you thought that was just a United States thing?
No. Now, we just talked about that, right? I mean, the Great Depression was worldwide, and in some places it was worse than it was in the U.S., for sure.
No. It was a worldwide catastrophe. To throw even more salt in the wound, wheat prices were taking a pounding. So not only was it a pain to grow, but yielding any wheat, ironically enough, wasn't netting much bread. But then comes the main villain of the story. With environmental, mental, and financial odds stacked against them, the Aussies faced one more foe. The dreaded emu.
Now, I'm going to go get ahead of this right now. It sounds like he said it the way that our Australian listeners like to hear. I call them emus. I know that this is a really touchy subject for Australians, because when we did the oversimplified emu war, people were coming out of the woodwork saying it's emu, not emu. Guess what? I'm not Australian. I'm American. Guess what? The word's not Australian. I think it's Portuguese. So deal with it.
Bet. Actually, it was more like 20,000 emus. A massive mob of the flightless birds had migrated from more central regions of the outback towards the west in search of cooler temperatures and more fruitful areas for public mastication. Unfortunately for the aspiring farmers, such a source of sustenance was their main cash crop.
I love how he's just using the hands that look like birds to illustrate this.
The wheat. The emus swarmed the farmlands, consuming everything in their wake. So the farmers phoned the government. Oi, government, these right cunts are eating on me crops. The news spread quickly, making it all the way up to the Minister of Defense, who approved a military intervention to deal with the pest problem. The solution? A few lead pills administered through an ergonomic dispenser. They were going to shoot them. Deployed onto the field were 2 Lewis light machine guns with approximately 10,000 rounds and a military vehicle for mobility. The basic idea was to scare off the flocks and send them back where they came from, or at least somewhere that wasn't farmland. But things, of course, didn't go according to plan.
Nope.
To make up for the fact that they're flightless, emus are extreme sprinters, capable of topping out at around 30 miles an hour. Also keep in mind that emus can stand as tall as 6.5 feet and weigh over 100.
Did I say 5 foot 12 inches tall?
30 pounds. So these feathered balls of rage were no pushovers.
Nope.
Righto, let's open her up. The emus were slippery little devils, able to weave in and out of the gunfire pretty effectively. They ran around all over the place, tearing up crops in the process. But the real kick in the dick here is that they refused to relocate away from their newfound food source. After a few weeks, only a few hundred emus were slain, barely a dent in the total population. So the government tried again, improving ambush tactics and rallying locals to help out. They were way more successful, bringing the kill count to about 1,000. Still only about 5% of the estimated population. The Australian government threw in the towel, with the public deeming the operation a waste of government resources amidst a global economic crisis.
Yes, you lost a war to flightless birds.
Despite staring down the barrel of a machine gun, the emus were declared the victors. For now. In addition to erecting more effective fencing, the government turned to the everyday citizen for help, providing free or subsidized ammo for some good old-fashioned giant bird hunting. Within just 6 months, over 50,000 bounties had been claimed and paid out. And over the next few decades, this number grew to nearly 300,000.
Jeez.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys.
Nice. Always love a good Lord of the Rings reference. Yeah, in the end, it's probably more effective to outsource it to the private sector than for the government to handle it. All right.